Good evening. It's October 31st, 2023, and in this Outside the Class series, we're continuing a study of a person that has fascinated me since I picked up the Bible. It's Jonah. Tonight, we begin our reflections on challenging God with Rabbi David Fohrman from Aleph Beta. On TheDustyFeet.com, in the Outside the Class section, we have the Challenging God source video set up for review. Because the purpose of Outside the Class is for you to listen to the in-class lecture first. That would be from the source video playlist. And with this way of doing things, you can watch the video before we begin chatting. Still hope to keep these around 15 to 20 minutes or so. Easy to catch and easier to catch up on. So, we're going to begin our Challenging God series with the meaning of the story. Outside the Class on the Dusty Feet. And before we forget, if you find these kinds of podcasts useful, that's when you click the subscribe button. Reminders, they just help you. But also, if you think that these might be useful to others, then click the like button, because that is the way that YouTube chooses to share these to more people if they wish. So, Challenging God, the meaning of the story. These videos from Rabbi Fohrman, they're different from the ones from Tim Mackey. Tim's are between 45 minutes to an hour long. These are just 7 to 12 minutes. Yet we still do see some interesting additional things that we can explore. So the meaning of the story, the context for the Jewish reading of Jonah is in relation to Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. It's the Haftorah reading. So, why then, and how does it fit there? Is the scroll of Jonah about repentance? Is that the purpose of the story? Sure, it has repentance in the story, but it's not the book of the repentance of Nineveh. It's not really even actually about Nineveh. It's about Jonah. It's a Jonah journey story. You got a message, a ship, fish, walking and talking, complaining. This is not about repentance. In fact, Jonah never does it at all. His personal actions are far from those worthy of a prophet. He never apologizes. He never repents. Jonah is the worst acting character in the entire story. Even with his in-the-belly prayer, I found that half-hearted and weak. I think we're going to see that. I love how Rabbi Fohrman brings up a point about the connection, though, this between Yom Kippur and Jonah. A day, one that's all about teshuvah, repentance, and a book about Jonah, which is not. You know how we love red string connections here. So, we're going to address something more fundamental in both stories. Then we'll see where it takes us. So let's dig in. Rabbi Fohrman talks about a certain kind of air, a certain kind of environment in which teshuvah, repentance, where it breathes. And his proposition is that if we have trouble grasping that, then maybe even Yom Kippur might not make sense. And the book of Jonah, it's going to help us understand what that environment is. Like he said, this sounds a little abstract until we dig into the nitty-gritty of the book. We need to expand our thinking, open up our eyes to the things that this book, this scroll, is trying to help us understand. So, we're hit, as the rabbi points out, with two basic questions that will support the direction that we're going to be heading. One of those questions is at the beginning, the other at the end. So, we've just started the book with the first few verses. This could pop out at you. And, I like when the rabbi shares in Hebrew. Because for me, it's often a very important part of red string connections. Let me bring up a thought Remember when I brought up a recent, in an amazing Jonah episode about the storyteller saying the story? Hearing the storyteller speak, vocal tone, even facial expression. So another part of about the storyteller in that thought line is also the words themselves. Remember, this story is in Hebrew. Don't forget that. English is the afterthought. It's often when you're hearing anyone speak in any language, right? You'll pick up repetitive words. Most often, interesting, it's the root of the word that's going to stick out. So maybe a question that should come up is, how are the words connected, right? These same root sounds. We hear the story, and already we can have a question, right? But, okay, so let's not forget that thought as we move forward, connecting the words, the thoughts, the ideas, and the red strings, right? Okay, sometimes in storytelling, there can be a few different ways to start a story. Yeah, sometimes the storyteller will set the scene, as it were. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. This is the story of a man named Eddie, and it starts at the end, with Eddie dying in the sun. It may seem strange to start a story with an ending, but all endings are also beginnings. We just don't know it at the time. So the storytellers, they set the scene, but also, sometimes, the storyteller has some assumptions, things that the storyteller might expect you to know before we begin. And we can get these in the first few lines as well. Yeah? When I stepped out into the bright sun from the darkness of the movie house, I had only two things on my mind: Paul Newman and a ride home. Okay, one, if someone has never been to a movie house, because remember, not everyone is grown up like we might have. And if you don't know who Paul Newman is, well, you might be a bit behind in the story from the start. Still at times we fill in story parts with something that is from our own past. And the others, they're just from things told to us. At dusk they pour from the sky, they blow across the ramparts, they turn cartwheels over rooftops, flutter into the ravines between the houses. Entire streets swirl with them, flashing white against the cobbles. Urgent message to the inhabitants of this town, they say, depart immediately to open country. If you don't understand snow or snowflakes, well, you get the picture. So do we really understand the beginning? So Jonah opens. Jonah is a prophet. So what's a prophet? For the sake of this discussion, we can limit it to a prophet in the Bible, as the Bible uses them. Context counts. So these people, they are chosen by God for a select purpose and message. A prophet is one delivering a message. In these cases, from God or from a messenger from God. Notice I didn't say that they could see into the future, tell us what was going to happen. That would be incorrect. It's oft thought of that way in cultural circles, but it does not fit the biblical context. They are spokesmen for a word from God. And if you read or listen to the prophet's tales, it's generally a sad, sad tale indeed. Just thought of another opening from a book. If you are interested in stories with happy endings, you'd be better off reading some other book. In this book, not only are there no happy endings, there's no happy beginning, and very few happy things in the middle. The prophets in the Bible have dire messages. We think the purpose of the story is for it to come true. As far as teshuvah, that might be true, and I'll bite there. But the warnings, the woes, and this will happen if lines, they are designed and purposed not to happen. It's almost like, please don't let these words be true. You do not want this to happen. So the original audience, these children of Israel, they have a notion anyways of these prophets of God. And safe to say, they're aware of the outcome of many of those stories. So this is an expectation of the storyteller, or else they'd have to explain everything. Rabbi Fohrman points this out in the opening verses. And then with that understanding, the audience can then start asking questions. So Jonah is a prophet. So there is an expected behavior. And unlike all of the other prophets, Jonah's behavior is upside down and backwards. Not only does he not confront the people like he's supposed to do, he literally runs away. The audience already scratching their heads. Is he the hero of the story or not? Is he a protagonist or an antagonist? Does this guy even realize what he is and who he's dealing with? Run away from God? There he is, shipbound for the furthest point west on the known world map, and then storm, giant fish. God cannot be avoided. So the first question, why does Jonah run away from God? And then there's probably a sub-question, why does Jonah think he can run from God? I love the Rabbi's connections, and in his study, the second question, it links us to the end of the book. We have context set up, and there's probably a small spoiler alert. Nineveh repents, and the calamity forestalled, and Jonah's pouting. He's so upset with the turn of events that he'd rather be dead. Kind of drastic, don't you think? So then overnight, a gourd sprouts a plant that offers shade and respite. Then again, overnight, the worm arrives and eats the roots, and the plant withers and dies. Jonah is complaining again. Are we really surprised? But then God asks Jonah a question. And that's Jonah chapter 4, verses 10 and 11, right? Then the Lord said, "You had compassion on the plant for which you did not work, and which you did not cause to grow, which came up overnight and perished overnight. Should I not have compassion on Nineveh, the great city in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know the difference between their right and left hand, as well as many animals?" The book ends. No answer. We can think, maybe, what might Jonah's answer be? We've seen his character played out a bit in this story. Really, what might Jonah have said? What would have made sense to him? Is that Jonah speaking up and saying, "I give up, God. Yes, you were right all along"? It's probably not really something that I would expect him to say in the story. I think it may be something more like, "What do you even mean I had compassion on that gourd? It was hot. It was scorching hot outside, and the plant sprouted up for the first time in a while, and I was happy. But now I'm miserable again. Go figure, I'm upset. And how was that supposed to help me understand why you chose to spare Nineveh?" I don't think he's compelled by the analogy that God is using. So these are the two great questions that lay at the heart of this scroll of Jonah. One, why does Jonah run away from God? That little sub-question, why does Jonah think he can run away from God? And two, second, the last question that God poses to Jonah. Should I not have compassion on Nineveh, the great city in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know the difference between their right and left hand, as well as many animals? Does the beginning of the book make sense? Why does Jonah want to run away? Does the end of the book make sense? What is God trying to teach Jonah with the story? Is the analogy of the gourd even effective? So, as Rabbi Fohrman postulates, these two questions are actually related to each other. In order to make sense of the book, we need to attack these questions together. And it makes sense. How one understands the beginning, right? Jonah's motivation for running away, and then that is going to affect how one would understand the analogies with the worm and the gourd at the end. And in the next episode, we're going to take a stab at it. So, next week, we will explore the next source video, challenging God with 4 possible approaches. And thanks for with us tonight on Outside the Class on the Dusty Feet.